Hey, good evening. It's about time for us to get started tonight. To give you a little insight on what's going on, Blake is in the summer series, I guess it is. He's speaking over in Fort Payne tonight, so y'all keep him in your prayers as he's traveling back and forth. And he asked me the other day if I'd take over tonight, and I said, sure. And then I realized, hey, I've got to figure out what to do, So bear with me tonight because it's going to be something kind of bouncing off of something Eugene's been doing. Before we get going, we have a lot of people on our prayer list. Of course, we want to remember Larry Dyer. Doctors have found the stomach cancer has returned, so keep him in your prayers if you will. And Jimmy Large, if you can, give him some encouragement. You know, he's gone completely blind in his right eye, and he's losing sight in his left eye, and so he's kind of depressed right now. But y'all lift him up in prayer, if you will, and keep him going. I found out today that Amy Kyle, which is the daughter of David and Mary Wallace, she's expecting, and she has been told she's going to have to stay in bed now. So she's put on bed rest until the baby gets here. So you know how that goes. It's a long process, and I know it can be a strain. So y'all keep her in your prayers, if you will. Don Barbales has he has terminal cancer, and he's the brother of Connie Barbales, which is a friend of Penny Keck. And y'all keep him in your prayers, if you will. And Gary Davis, another friend of Penny's, had a bad fall to the hospital. Is he still in the hospital, Miss Penny? No, he's out of the hospital now. But he had a bunch of fractures and broken ribs and what have you. So y'all keep him in your prayers, if you will. Got a lot of people on our prayer list. I'm going to ask you to pick up a copy if you haven't already done so, and lift these people up because they need some encouragement. They need prayers, and of course, as our brothers and sisters in Christ, we always want to carry them before God. So at this time, why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's have a prayer, okay? Holy Father, we humbly come before you this evening, and we're so grateful that we can gather together tonight and study a portion of your holy word and just strengthen and encourage our faith. We ask you, Father, to be with each of us as we gain insight from your word and from the things that we can glean from the things that you have made and the things that you have done. We ask you, Father, to be with those on our prayer list, and there's so many of them, but you know each and every one of them as we lift them up to you, and we just ask you to wrap them up in your love and reach down your healing hand and take care of them as only you can. Be with us now as we continue on with our study, and give us wisdom and insight, and as I said earlier, Father, help us to be encouraged in our faith and you as the only one and true God. This is our prayer in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All righty. As I said, bear with me tonight, because tonight what I'm going to do, I think many of you know Professor T. Eugene Moss, and he said some things in a class that he is teaching now that's kind of got me to thinking, got the juices flowing. By the way, he's also known as Snookums, and you may want to tell him that. I missed the fact that he's not here tonight. But anyway, Eugene said some things. He's teaching a class on Sunday morning called His Story, or Connecting the Dots of the Old Testament. That's 9:30 on Sunday morning here in the auditorium. Good class. If you are able to be here, come and give him some support and learn something as he goes through the Old Testament. And we see Jesus, somebody once said, I believe it was David Roper, said that it's like a rope that the British used to have, and the way they could tell it was their rope to keep people from stealing it, they'd run a red line all the way through that rope, and if somebody cut it, you'd find that red line in it. That's the way the Old Testament is. It's got a thin red line all the way through it, and that's the blood of Jesus. So y'all want to keep that in mind as he's going through that study. And like I said, give him some support. Sitting in his classes, I sit back and I listen to what's going on here, and boy, he gets the juices to flowing. You know how it is when somebody will say something, and all of a sudden, bingo, man. I have a bad habit of chasing rabbits. I don't know if you do, David, but somebody will say something in my mind to go over here, and they're still talking about this over there. And I love that because having Bible studies and talking about things that are going on around us and what have you gets the juices to flowing and focuses upon God. So what I decided to do tonight after Blake asked me this, I want to examine a few of these curiosities, things we don't talk about a whole lot. And we did talk about some of it in his Bible class the other day, last couple of Sundays. And I just want to share with you some things and kind of reinforce some of the things that he has said, because I agree with everything he's saying so far, and which is unusual. But y'all bear with me as we get into this. One of the first things that he was talking about last week, I believe it was the idea of God and science. And we have a problem with God and science, it seems like, in the secular world. Because I know most of you know this fellow, Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking was a fellow who said, before we understand science, it's natural to believe that God created the universe. But now science offers a more convincing explanation. And of course, Stephen Hawking passed away not long ago, and I think he found out who God is. But he was an atheist to begin with. But everything is based upon science. And your children and your grandchildren, they go to school, and everything that they get to them is kind of anti-God. They don't want to teach creationism in schools any longer. And so what has happened, those of us who believe in God's Word being divinely inspired and being true and accurate, has come under attack. Right here at the very start, Genesis 1, in the beginning, God creates a problem. And the reason it creates a problem is because that story of creation is, under attack by the scientific community. You know, what I mean by that, a fellow by the name of Charles Darwin, everybody has heard of Charles Darwin and his famous voyage on the Beagle. He goes over to the Galapagos Islands, he picks up a bunch of watches some little finches and what have you, and he came up with the theory of survival of the fittest. And out of all of that, or let's see, selection of, I forget what it was called, selection, something. Anyway, based upon his findings and what have you, a theory known as evolution came in. And that's how your ancestors way back when were chimpanzees, all right? And so we have gone through this period of time to get to where we are today, Homo sapiens. And that theory of evolution has created a lot of problems because young people and a lot of older people, you might be one of them, I don't know, have come up with this idea of theistic evolution. And what that amounts to is a belief that God directed the evolutionary process. And they base this upon, well, before I get into what they base it upon, this creates a conflict. There are those that believe that God created the world in 6 days, and those that believe it took a very long time. Your children are going to be way confused. As a matter of fact, you might be confused, I don't know, but there's a lot of things going on that really hamper a person's faith in God. A lot of people just throw up their hands and don't believe in God any longer because of this evolutionary stuff. One of the big problems is this old earth, new earth theory, and Eugene was talking about that the other day. The old earth theory is that the earth is 13.7 billion years old. Of course, when we follow the genealogies and what have you in the Bible, from the Genesis account, it's only between 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Now, that's a big difference, big difference. And so what has happened is the theistic evolutionists, those are the people who want to believe in God and evolution, they say in the beginning there was nothing, and all of a sudden, bang, God spoke everything into existence. And then it took eons upon eons upon eons for things to get as they are today. And the way they get this is what we call the gap theory. And the gap theory is that in Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And then in Genesis 2, it says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. In between those two verses, there's a gap, is what they teach, theistic evolutionists. And they say that gap is billions of years. So this is how people who name the name of Christ get by what the New Testament is, or what the Old Testament is saying in the creation, by putting this gap of time in there, and they have to do that to give time for evolutionary process to work. All right? I believe it was the other day who who was it? Wasn't Tony Cleveland, Doyle. I believe that's who it was asking about the stars in the sky and what have you, and how much distance there is between it and how far it is, how long it takes to get there. Well, the truth is, if we were to get in a rocket ship, if we were to take that rocket ship and travel from one constellation, or one galaxy rather, to another galaxy far, far away, it's about 13.05 billion light years away. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot until you figure out you got to be traveling 186,000 miles per second for 13 billion light years to get there. Now, that's a long time. That's cosmology. And they say, well, you know, we had to have that in order for the creation to work. We have to have all those time periods in there for the galaxies to get where they are and how far apart they are and what have you. Now, Bible believers, we don't believe that. We believe that God spoke and things came into existence. And the simplest way I know to put it, I think I was telling David about this the other day, is if I took a paintbrush and I took that paintbrush and I dipped it in the paint and I just went on a piece of canvas, I'd have dots all over the place, right? Well, let's say a little bug comes along, and that little bug is looking at one dot and another dot far away. And what he does is he starts making that travel. And he goes from one dot to the other dot on my canvas. It takes him 5 seconds to get there, okay? That's the time it took for him to travel from here to here. However, the dots didn't come down in time. I didn't paint the dots one at a time. The dots happened at once when I splattered the brush. That's the way God creates the universe. Everything is placed in motion to where it belongs at the identical same time. Astrophysicists talk about things like space-time and how time can be warped in the fabric of time and all this other stuff, and how, you know, the weight of a galaxy can do things. And they get into all kinds of crazy stuff, and this space-time continuum and what have you, and it creates a problem. We, however, believe that Genesis 1 talks about 6 days of creation, right? 6 days. And here's the problem, the word yom. That Hebrew word yom can be translated as a day, a part of a week, part of a month, part of a year. And so it's kind of loosely based. And so we need to go to the Bible and find out what we're talking about here. Now, one of these creation evolutionists, or theistic evolutionists, he says Yom in the creation account is the summary for each of the 6 days of creation. Okay? There was morning and evening for the first day. However, notice what he says. Yom is used to represent a finite, long period of time, usually either million or billions of years. And so it was billions or billions of years for the first day, millions or billions of years for the second day, and so forth, right? Now, we who believe in God and the Bible and its inspiration believe that Genesis 1 verse 5 says the evening and the morning were one day. And we look at that as being one day. So what's the Bible say? Well, let's look at something. We need to understand that we do not count time the way the Hebrew writers did, okay? For example, remember when Lazarus died? And Jesus kind of waited around with his disciples. Then one day he says, hey, let's get up and let's go to Jerusalem. And his disciples said, Rabbi, the Jews were ready to seek and stone thee, and thou goest thither again. This is King James Version. And Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? Now, wait a minute, Lord. What do you mean 12 hours in a day? A day is more than 12 hours. We know that, huh, Tim? A day is 24 hours. We know that without a shadow of a doubt. But Jesus said, no, there's 12 hours in a day. What you talking about, Lord? Over in 2 Chronicles 13 and 11, we see the same phrase, morning and evening, that you see over in the book of Genesis. And it says they burned unto Jehovah every morning and every evening burnt offerings of the sweet incense of showbread. They also set order upon the pure table and what have you. Now notice that they're talking about evening and morning. So wait a minute. Are they burning incense all night long? No, they're burning incense evening and morning. What? Nighttime. Now when you look at nighttime, it's divided into 4 3-hour time periods. And what I mean by that, over in Luke 12, verse 18, Jesus is talking about when the master comes home. He says, if he shall come in the second watch and it's the third watch, and find them so blessed. Okay, so here we have a first watch, which is inferred. Then we have a second watch and a third watch. And then over when he's walking on the water, or in Luke 14, or Matthew 14 rather, he's doing that at the fourth watch of the night. So nighttime is divided up into 4 3-hour periods. That's 12 hours, right? Got that? Jewish chronology. Morning was 6 hours that began at sunrise and ended at 12 noon. Evening was 6 hours that began at 12 noon and ended at sundown. Night was that 12-hour period that was divided into 4 separate sections. So the daytime, evening and morning were the first day over in Genesis. We normally look at that as being 24 hours, yet there is a lot of biblical evidence that we're talking about God only worked morning and evening, which from sun up to sundown, okay? Day of creation could mean 12 hours. He didn't work at night, okay? But then they come along and say, now wait a minute, these theistic evolutionists. They say, look, over 2 Peter 3:8. In 2 Peter 3:8, it says that the Lord, with the Lord, 1,000 years, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. So we're talking about a bunch of time there. Be consistent in translating, okay? Because they're not consistent in translating. What I mean by that, how many of y'all remember a fellow by the name of Joshua? And Joshua is going into the land of Canaan. He comes to a little place called Jericho. And when he gets to Jericho, they didn't attack it, did they? God told Joshua in 6:3 to march around that city with all the armed men and do that for 6,000 years. Is that what he said? No, he said do it for 6 days. Okay? Then on the 7th day, it's going to be something different. Remember a fellow by the name of Jonah, swallowed by a great fish. Remember that? Over in Jonah 1:17, he was in the belly of the fish 3,000 years. No. See, people need to learn to be consistent with how they're interpreting the Word. The days of Genesis 1 are nothing more than the 24-hour period that we see, morning and evening. During that 12-hour period, the Lord's created 6 days. Okay? Well, what about geology? What about that? What about the formation of the earth? I mean, that takes lots of time to happen, doesn't it? It took millions of years for the strata to form, didn't it, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at. However, Job 28, verse 9 through 11 says, he puts forth his hand upon the flinty rock, and he overturns the mountains by the roots. He cutteth the channels among the rocks, and his eye seeth every precious thing. He bindeth the streams that they trickle not. The things that are hid bringeth forth to light. God does all of this. But when God does it, it's like one man I heard say he created the Rocky Mountains by standing here on the earth and just scooping it up with his hand. I don't know that God did it that way. We know that that's not how geology works. But we understand that when God operates, he does it like this. Well, how do we know that it didn't take millions and millions of years? This is called the geological calendar. And in it, you're going to find the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic ages, if you look down the middle of that column. And that goes from now to 400.6 billion years ago here on the earth, okay? Now, circle reasoning. What they find in that the Cambrian period, those troglodytes, whatever you want to call them, what they find there, they say that it's got to come from that period of time because that's when they lived. And they say that they live because we found it in that period of time. So what we're doing is circle reasoning. What they don't tell you is they find fossils in every one of those layers from different time periods. Okay? So, here, anybody, what is that, David? You know? Looks like a hammer, doesn't it? Huh? It is. It's a hammer. And that is an iron head on it. And of course, the handle is fossilized and it's encased in rock. They found that thing a few years ago, 500 million year old hammer found in the Paleozoic period. What you talking about, Ken? That hammer was found right there. Okay? That's the only thing that existed then was trilobites, according to science. Man come up here between 1.8 to 5.3 million years ago. That's when men got here. So who made the hammer? Okay? See, what I'm getting at is they don't tell you about these things that they find and try to push it under the covers because it's going to destroy their theories. And if they can't have anything that'll destroy their theory. All right? Here's something. See that thing in the middle? That's a tree. And I want you to notice what that tree is doing. It's called a polystrate fossil. And that polystrate fossil is growing straight up, or it grew straight up through each of those rock stratus. Okay? Now, each of those stratus is 1 billion years. He says, what science will tell you. Now, if it was 1 billion years, I have a tree that was cut down in my yard, oh goodness, a couple of years ago, and the stump is about that big. I went out there the other day and kicked it, and the stump fell apart. What's going to happen to a tree when it dies? Is it going to last 1 billion years? But yet, that's going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we're talking several billion years right here. That tree has existed. And these things are found all over the world. Let me push the right button. You'll see them everywhere. And they've got them in every country. And so what happened? How'd they get there? Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. It's called the flood. What happens when you take water and you run it in a tub and then you turn it loose? It stratifies. If I were to take sugar, give me something like that. Different elements, different things like sugar, salt, pepper, things like that. And I put it in a jar and I shook it up with water. What happens? It stratifies. And so you have one layer of each one. That's what happens to the world when the flood came. It's stratified. Now, what I mean by that, let's go ahead and look. Wait a minute. What about those stalactites and those stalagmites? Those things took 270,000 years to form, right? Well, not really. The reason being is because there's a place called Carnesborough, England. It's called the Petrifying Well. And everybody goes over to this petrifying well. It does the same identical thing that the things in the stalactites and stalagmites do. And they hang little things. If you'll notice up there, probably see some little things hanging. People will hang things up there. And one of the most prominent things they hang up there is teddy bears. And teddy bears are fossilized in a period of about 3 to 5 months. The same process that they use for stalactites and stalagmites. It doesn't take 1 billion years to make them, all right? Made by the same materials. Well, what about the Grand Canyon? Grand Canyon, I mean, that's a doozy. Anybody ever been over there and seen the Grand Canyon? Magnificent, isn't it? How old they tell you it was? Do you remember? Okay. 70 to 80 million years old, something like that. That's how long it took for the Colorado River to cut through all that strata and make the Grand Canyon. Really? How many of y'all remember Mount St. Helens? Okay, that was a doozy, wasn't it? Mount St. Helens, there in Washington State. I was in Wenatchee, Washington when that thing blew up, and I'll guarantee you that was amazing because about noon, all the lights in town came on and you could not see the sun. All right, it was dark. Everybody thought it was the end of the world because of all that ash coming down. Well, that ash came down after it devastated everything, but it came down and it got to the Toutle River. I believe it's Toutle River, something like that. And that pumice and rock and tree and debris dammed up that river for a period of about 6 months. And the river just stopped, quit flowing. But all of a sudden, the dam broke. And all that water that was backed up, now think about it, it's backed up. You got the mountains over here, and it's just backing up and backing up. And it's going from the flat area to the high area, just getting higher and higher. And the dam broke. That canyon was carved in 8 hours. That's amazing to me. And if you'll notice, that canyon has strata, just like the Grand Canyon, and it didn't take 1 billion years for that to happen. So what we're saying is a tremendous water flow can do exactly what we see at the Grand Canyon. The flood as the waters recede, all right? Well, what about dinosaurs? There's no dinosaurs in the Bible, right? Well, I like what David told me the other day, talking about dinosaurs. God's got a sense of humor. He says, let's just go ahead and I'll make this thing, this bone over here, and we'll stick it over there and let them find it, let them try to figure out what this is. Okay? Yeah, that's a good thought. Dinosaurs in the Bible. Anybody ever read about a dinosaur in the Bible? I don't think so. Matter of fact, dinosaurs didn't come into existence until 1841. What you talking about, Ken? Richard Owens, he coined the word dinosaur in 1841. Means terrible lizards. Prior to that, nobody called them dinosaurs. They called them beasts or monsters or something along that line. In the King James, in the Victorian English, they called them dragons. Now, when you read the King James Version, boy, it didn't come up. The Hebrew's not there. The word is tanin. And that is translated as dragon in your King James versions of the Bible. And you'll find it in there, oh goodness, dragon about 19 times and dragons, plural, half a dozen times, okay, or more. And tanin simply means, in Hebrew, it's a term for a large reptile. That was the Hebrew word for dinosaur. All right? It was a catch-all phrase. You see a big creature walking, a tanin, right? That's what they were looking at. Like we say, what's that? It's a dinosaur. When I was a kid, we'd go out and we'd buy those cereals, you know, and had 5 different flavors in it, and there 5 little critters in it. What are they? They're dinosaurs, even though they were all different. That was the catch-all term, tanin. And a tanin over in Isaiah 14:29, rejoice not, whole Palestinian, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and out of his fruit shall come a fiery flying serpent. Okay? That is a Sarif Inim Tanin, a bronze-colored flying reptile. That's mentioned in the Bible. Well, what's a bronze-colored flying reptile? Could be a pterodactyl. Could be a pteranodon. Could be we had a lot of flying reptiles, okay? That could be what we're talking about in Isaiah. To say it's no flying reptiles in the Bible, like pteranodon, is ludicrous because, yes, the flying serpent or the flying dragon is there. Tanin, Isaiah 27:1. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, the crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon, Tanin, that's Leviathan, that's in the sea. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word, okay? But that's partly what we're looking at. We had dinosaurs in the water, so to speak. And of course, the Bible talks about that. Then you have one in Job called the behemoth. And behemoth, in your versions of the Bible, may say a hippopotamus or an elephant. But the behemoth had a tail like a tree trunk, and hippopotamus and elephants don't do that. All right? Over the book of Job, chapter 40, verse 15. Behold now the behemoth, which I made thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Now, we know that there are things like Brontosaurus, but if you'll see down there on the ground, you have, that's a Triceratops. And the Triceratops was a herbivore, just like the Brontosaurus was a herbivore. So God is talking about, I made these things, and pay attention to them. Well, wait a minute. Dinosaurs died out way before man arrived on the earth. Really? Anybody ever see that first original Tomb Raider movie? You didn't miss anything. All right? I hope you didn't pay to go see it. It's not even worth watching on TV, but for free. But Lara Croft Tomb Raider, they go over to Cambodia and they go to the temple of Ta Prohm. And this is a little Buddhist temple that's over there. And they filmed a lot of that movie at that temple. And there at that temple, they have carvings in the door facings and things of that nature. And these carvings, if you'll see, that's one carving right there. It has things like monkey and a deer and a buffalo and a priest and what have you. But also, just about center of that, just low center of that one, it has this. That's a Stegosaurus. Now, how do you carve a Stegosaurus if you've never seen one?
When we were in Arizona a few years ago, we went to a village that was Anasazi Indians, and there were cliff drawings, and there was a picture that was etched in the rock.
Yeah.
Like a brontosaurus with a man.
I think I've got it. Okay. The Inca stones in Inca, Peru. If you'll look at that, you might not be able to tell a whole lot about it, but it's a lizard-looking creature with spikes on his back and a man standing beside him. Also, look at that one. That's a Triceratops. Got a guy sitting on it. How do you draw them if you've never seen them? That one, everybody knows what a T-Rex is, okay? And these things are ages old. These stones here are estimated to be a little over 4,000 years old, okay? Is this one you're talking about? That's it, the Anasazi. Back in Utah, 1,200 to 1,400 years ago, they find this etched in stone, which is what Susie was talking about. In Africa, you have this painting that's on a skin of the African villagers trying to take down a lake monster. And if you'll notice, that lake monster, what is it, Paladiosaur? Notice it's got, instead of feet, it's got flippers, okay? And that's what they're drawing here. At Cambrio, Mexico. In Cambrio, Mexico, figurines. Notice what they're drawing. All right? And these figurines, there are over 33,000 of them. And guess what? They're dated at 2500 BC. How do you get something that you've never seen and make it? All right? And they do it with such precision. In Rockport, Texas, yeah, I believe it's Rockport, you have footprints of man and dinosaur together. As a matter of fact, in a place called the Paluxy River in a limestone footbed, you have dinosaur and man's footprints right there on top of each other, and somehow or other, the man's footprints disappear. I don't know what happened to him, but they were together, all right? Well, then they go, miracles can't happen. And I know first bell rang, right? What about the parting of the Red Sea? That can't happen. Well, let me, real quick, Yam Suf, that's translated Red Sea, and all the theistic evolutionists say that can't be right. That's got to be the Reed Sea. And it's got to be this little wadi out here, and what happened is the east wind blew on it, and it got the water away from it, and they went across on mud, and the chariots got stuck in mud when Pharaoh was following. And I don't believe that, because that's not what the Bible says. As a matter of fact, over in 2 Kings 9, verse 26, King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion Geber, which was near Elath in Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. All right? And he erected a stele, and I'll get to that in a minute. He put one on the Egyptian side and one on the Arabian side. The Arabian side's been moved. All right? Now, when we talk about the Red Sea, remember, we talk about the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. That's still part of the Red Sea. And where he found that, if you could see it, that circle there, the arrows didn't show up real well, but he put one directly across from each other. Let me show you something. On that stele, you know what that stele is talking about? Mizraim, Egypt, Solomon, Edom, death, Pharaoh, Moses, and Yahweh. He's commemorating not only where he launched his fleet, but also commemorating the crossing of the Red Sea by the Israelites. Now people say, now how do we know that? Well, people didn't know that. They were looking in the wrong place. And so here about 1980 something, which you probably never heard of, in 1980, they got to looking, and right across from Nambia, Egypt, going into Saudi Arabia, there in the Gulf of Suez, there is a, Gulf of Aqaba rather, there is a high depression, or a high part. And they says, well, wonder about what the deal is on this. So they got scuba divers out, and they began to look, and they went anywhere from 60 feet to 200 feet. And you know what they found? That looks like a mushroom. Let me give you a better picture. How about a wheel? How about another wheel that goes to a chariot? How about a spoke, 6 spokes, kind of like the one that the Pharaoh Tutmosis IV used? Okay? Now, gold does not get encrusted with coral. Chariot spokes, chariot wheel. And this is strewn all across that area. They find chariot wheels, they find horses' hoofs, they find bones of human beings, and all of that 200 feet underwater. Wow. Folks, God is real. If we only had the evidence to show us where we could look at it and pay more attention to it, we would be very, very blessed knowing how to answer scientists when they come up with all these fantastic theories. Again, thank you, T. Eugene Moss, and I suggest y'all go to Snookum's class Sunday morning. Thank you.